Hey troops, my name is Jeff Evely. I'm the Operations Sergeant Major for Veterans for Freedom, and I have with me now our Intelligence Officer, Tom Quiggan. Today, we were going to do something like an expose on an issue that's being ginned up in the media and in the state and has been for some time. The issue of white supremacy and right-wing extremism seems to be getting a lot of traction in a lot of the state-funded media and the like. But we decided to suck that one back at the last minute because we have some breaking news with us right now about Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence being raided by the FBI down in the United States. Also, the expose was going to be something, the first part of a series that we plan on launching called The Harsh Truth. Where we do deep dives into these different issues and get into the minutiae of what's really going on behind the scenes and where all the ideological overlap is between the different institutions and stuff like this. But we decided that we'd wait on that because we want to make sure that we get it right, of course. And we're planning on launching a daily podcast pretty soon. It's going to be called Freedom Front North. And so that's going to be our daily live stream. And these exposés are really something that we'd like to kind of put together with, high production value and probably record ahead of time. And we'll just release them as we go through the daily podcast. So we're gonna suck back on that one for now and roll with the breaking news of the ex-president's residence at Mar-a-Lago being raided by the FBI. Tom, I thought before we dive into this one, we just kind of start with a few clips and see what's out there in the media, and then you and I can kind of do the usual back and forth once we give the viewers a bit of a flavor for what we're seeing out there. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Let's go. All right. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a little share screen here. Okay, so I just want to give a shout out first and foremost to an ally of Veterans for Freedom, Chris Dacey. He's always sporting our gear, and he's a real hardworking muckraker. So if you guys want to stay on top of what's going on out there, I suggest you follow Chris's page on Facebook. He's a real hardworking muckraker, and we really appreciate what he does. So here was Chris. It's a bit of a longer format kind of podcast that he's doing, but I thought I'd show a few seconds of it just because from my perspective, he was one of the people that were really breaking this news in Canada. So here's Chris. Can you hear that, Tom?
No.
I always get stuck on this same thing here. You think I would learn, but I'm going to stop that. Share it again. Share system audio this time. Seems to me like that should be the default, but I keep saying that. I will adjust.
Just finished my live with Johnny Rowe.
Good.
Just getting information here that the FBI is raiding Donald Trump. Apparently, multiple FBI agents have descended on Mar-a-Lago. Patriot Smoothie is going to join me here to discuss a little bit further. Donald Trump has been raided by the FBI. Apparently, they have accessed his safes. Multiple, I saw upwards of hundreds of FBI agents have descended on Donald Trump. So the FBI has been, there's Jonathan. Yeah, stand by for Jonathan Villeneuve. Patriot Smoothie. There you go.
I've lost control of my internet.
Stand by for Patriot Smoothie.
Okay, so there's Dacey. I just wanted to give a shout out to him, say good job for being right on top of that. I'm always on top of my news headlines and stuff, but man, oh man, it seems like I can't keep up with that guy. So here's a little something from CBC, this is state media, of course. So these guys are part of the problem from the V4F point of view. And I just want to show you what they're showing us about this right now.
How would you characterize this raid? And what were your thoughts when you first heard about this? Donald Trump called this a siege, an occupation. I wonder what you think about those words that he used.
Well, my first thought was that Karma is a magnificent queen, and she comes to visit occasionally. The irony of Donald Trump, calling this a siege, an occupation, etc., was that this took a federal judge to sign off on it, who was a Trump appointee. It took the Department of Justice, which is notoriously cautious about engaging in anything even vaguely political, and the FBI to execute on it independently of the White House and everything else. Donald Trump took classified materials. He stored them improperly. He kept them for purposes we don't understand yet. We have not seen the search warrant, but all the reporting says this has to do with 15 boxes of highly classified documents and materials that are an imminent national security risk. And so the reason Donald Trump got raided was he broke the law, and there was probable cause to execute a search warrant on him. It's not a conspiracy against Donald Trump per se, but if I took 15, I used to have a top secret clearance. I used to work in the Pentagon. If I had taken home 15 boxes of classified documents and mishandled them, I'd be in jail. No question. So he is right now facing, something he can't tweet or spin his way out of, and he's having a difficult time with it. So he's going to make all the excuses in the world for it, and he's going to scream that he's being persecuted, but in fact, he's just being prosecuted.
But it's not just Trump who's saying that. You're a Republican strategist, Rick.
I'm an independent now.
Okay. Independent now.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll throw that to you, Tom, for a couple of comments. What do you make of what they're saying so far?
Well, I'll tell you, Jeff, my first thought when I heard this last night, I saw this thing going by and I thought, well, that can't be right. So I looked it up, and sure enough, there's video of, FBI agents surrounding Mar-a-Lago. They're in there doing it. You think, oh my God, this is actually true. So my very first thought was, we've crossed a line, or at least America has crossed a line from which there is no going back. When you raid the personal residence of a former president, who also, by the way, is the leading contender for the Republicans in the next election, 2024, that's unprecedented in American history, certainly in modern times since the Civil War. A couple of other things pop to mind when you look at it. The first is the individual who signed off on the search warrant, or approved it, more correctly, I guess to say, would be Wray, the director of the FBI. Now, the problem with him is he also said that the FISA warrants used against Donald Trump in the past were constitutional and legal, when in fact they were highly unconstitutional, highly illegal, and based on false information. So the FBI has been caught repeatedly using false information to get FISA warrants to act against Donald Trump. So that's kind of the one problem.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that the FISA court actually issued a very rare statement as a result of the whole Spygate issue, where the Obama administration was wiretapping, in the words of Donald Trump, Carter Page, in order to get all the info about their political opponents around Carter Page, and that was what led to the unmasking of General Flynn and the eventual persecution of him and his son. So these are some very dirty tricks that people have been up to, and the courts are already on the record on this. But sorry to interrupt, Tom. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the problem. The FBI is an institution. Maybe 20 years ago, folks regarded the FBI as a reasonable outfit. And if they did something, most folks would go, wow, if the FBI is doing something, there must be something there. But of course, this is the same FBI that did the Steele dossier and tried to claim it was real, when in fact they knew from ground zero that the whole thing was fake. So that's kind of a problem. Now, the kicker in this story, and this is the one I think that's really going to undermine it, is the search warrant was signed by a judge, like it's supposed to be. The only problem is it looks like the judge who signed it, who's from Florida, which makes sense, also used to work for Jeffrey Epstein, when Epstein was being charged with being a pedophile and all that sort of stuff. And that Epstein eventually, I wouldn't say he walked on the pedophile charges the first time around, but he got this minimum custody sentence. He got to serve the sentence in the community, that he was supposed to sort of stay overnight in this jail, but he could go out and walk around during the day in the community. So Jeffrey Epstein, a known pedophile, tied to everybody in the Democratic Party and a whole bunch of other folks as well. This is the judge who signed the warrant. So to me, it just reeks of desperation that if they had to go to a judge who's tied to Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophile case, I mean, this does not reek credibility. It's a real problem. Now, Couple other problems here. The first is they're saying what's being alleged, although there's no actual information. So that fellow from the CBC clip there, says, well, this is about Donald Trump and classified information. That is what's believed to be happening, but nobody's actually seen the search warrant. Nobody's actually seen what's going on. But let's go with the flow and say that's the alleged crime, if you will. This brings up a couple of interesting things, like Hillary Clinton ran a server in her own house to use highly classified State Department, very, very sensitive documents in real time. And she said, oh, well, I didn't really understand. I just wiped the server and I thought everything was fine. And that was after she'd been asked to turn those documents over to Congress with a subpoena. So the problem kind of is Hillary Clinton got caught with tens of thousands of documents she wasn't supposed to have. She set up a server in her own home to deliberately violate State Department protocols, and nothing happens to her. But Donald Trump does it, and all of a sudden it's worthy of raiding his house under highly, highly dodgy circumstances. And then let's not even think about Hunter Biden's computer, where 54 members of the intelligence community said, oh, no, Hunter Biden's computer, that's all just Russian disinformation, which, of course, now has come out to be something less than true. In fact, guess what? Hunter Biden's laptop is real. It's got a ton of crap on there that's classified. It's got a ton of crap on there that's super sensitive. And nothing's happening to Hunter Biden, or at least nothing we can see. Now, here is one other problem that most reporters and even a lot of people don't get. And this is the business of handling classified intelligence. So for our viewers, let's just say there's kind of like, there could be like secret, and then there's top secret, and then there's compartmentalized. And the further up you go, the more sensitive it gets. So there's that kind of problem is, as it gets increasingly classified, you're supposed to do a better job of taking control of it. And then there's the business of sharing. Sometimes we have intelligence which is Canadian eyes only. This is stuff we only tell other Canadians about. And then there's CAN US, which is Canadian and American sharing only. CAN UK US, Canada, American, Britain. And then NATO secret, which means basically you can give it to anybody. But anyway, here's the problem with what they're saying. They say Donald Trump has the classified information, therefore that proves he's guilty right there. And it's kind of like, oh, wow, this is going to get interesting, because as a captain, so I'm just like a junior officer or some guy wandering around Yugoslavia during the war. I had a very high intelligence security classification. And while I was kind of wandering around the war in the former Yugoslavia doing source development and targeting and that sort of stuff, I had access to CAN UK US top secret and above intelligence. So here's the issue. Let's say you had something that's top secret and it says CAN UK US eyes only. And it refers to a potential attack or a buildup of weaponry in an area adjacent to, let's say, a battalion run by the Dutch or the Belgians or the Spanish or something like that. So the initial sort of swipe from the bureaucrats and the people at NDHQ would say, oh, no, it's CAN UK US eyes only. You can't tell the Dutch or the Belgians about it. And then the other thing is, well, what the hell are we doing here? How are we supposed to help our allies if we know that they're facing a threat and we're not supposed to tell them? So in my particular case, my boss was a Marine Corps colonel who happened to work for General Hayden, who was the head of the European Command for the Americans in Europe. So General Hayden was the boss of all Americans in Europe. So we went to him a couple of times and said, we need to release this intelligence. And he actually just said, look, do what's right. Like, don't call me every time, just do what's right. And the thinking there is, share whatever intelligence you feel you need to share to do force protection, to provide protective intelligence. And then if there's blowback afterwards, we'll deal with it later. So even me as like a junior officer or some dumb captain wandering around a war zone, I had authority to release intelligence beyond what the classification actually said. And I know all the CSIS people are going to go, oh my God, you're not allowed to do that. We can't do that. And the simple fact is, in a war zone, when things are going on, the rules tend to get a bit gray, which is where most of the intelligence community operates anyway. Now, the further up you go in rank, the more flexible the rules tend to get. So Donald Trump's rank was president. So he kind of outranks everybody in the system. And whether you like it or not, the president, as a senior ranking military official, because he is Commander-in-Chief, he's the commander of all American forces. That's his other hat. he has a right to take, use, disclose, and declassify information if he feels it's in the interest of America or if it's interest of the allies. So one of the problems I think the Democrats are going to face here if they try and pursue this case is they'll have to identify specific documents, identify a specific bit of information, and then Donald Trump's defense lawyer can say, it was important to me as president to disclose that to allies to prevent attack, to inform them, and whatever. So it's really, really gray zone. So when you see the press like that guy saying, well, this is an open and shut case. If he's got the information, he's guilty. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's a whole lot less clear than that. It's going to be incredibly muddy. My sense at the end of the day is, if you sort of take the view from 100,000 feet, this has very little to do with intelligence. It has very little to do with Mar-a-Lago. It has very little to do with declassifying. It has to do with a political situation where the Democrats see, you know, to be blunt, they're in a bit of trouble here. They have spent the last 5.5 years doing full-on attacks against Trump. And they, like many other people, believe that Trump may run in 2024. And it was thought that within the next week, Trump was actually going to show his hand as to whether he was going to run or not. So from an intelligence analysis point of view, from someone who's foreign to America, so if you're watching this from France or Japan or Russia, one of the observations is that the people in charge, that is to say, Mr. Biden and the Democratic Party, are incredibly worried about what's going on in the future. That is to say, the upcoming election in November and then the presidential election in 2024. And they are doing everything they possibly can to find something to disqualify Trump so he can't run. So yeah, as much as this is presented as a black and white case, Jeff, I think it's anything but. The implications down the road are frightening. America is highly divided right now. The politics of identity have, just divided Americans terribly. And, you know, if the Democrats are looking for a way to try and start a civil war, this is not a bad opening move. This could turn to a lot of violence very quickly. So you're kind of left with that feeling, are the folks that are running the White House and the FBI and the CIA to a certain degree, are they really that naive and really that stupid that they would pull this trick thinking it'll work for them politically? Or are they also sort of hoping that somebody will do something phenomenally stupid, like some bubba with a AR-15 and a Ford 250 will drive up to the FBI headquarters and shoot the place or something. And that way they can then say, oh, look, violence. Oh, my God, we need to crack down on everybody. January 6th was just the opening move. This proves that it's a civil war, la, la, la. So I remain agnostic. I couldn't swear one way or the other which way I think they're going. But a reasonable person could believe that this is just the result of stupidity on the part of Biden's White House staff and his minions over at the FBI. But another reasonable person could believe that they're deliberately trolling to try and create more trouble to provide an excuse for further crackdowns in the future. So interesting times we're living in, Jeff. I say this every time I talk, interesting days. And then you wake up the next morning and it gets even more interesting, Jeff.
It's always something. Yeah, always something. And just on the issue of the classified documents, as you point out, the commander-in-chief has the authority to declassify documents. And Trump actually did that during his term with some of the JFK documents there that he released. So that's a pretty good example. Also, we have historical examples we can point to, like General Petraeus, who was fined a very large amount for his mishandling of classified documents. He was, I believe, CIA director at the time. And then we have Hillary Clinton, who got off scot-free with James Comey coming out in front of the press corps and saying, oh, yeah, we looked at it and we don't really think that we're going to refer it to the attorney's office there, whatever you call it, the general attorney's office. And that was sort of unprecedented on its own. I mean, it's not really up to them to decide whether or not short charges go ahead. It's just up to them to kind of gather the evidence and hand it off to the Attorney General's office to decide whether or not that goes forward. So they've been accused of this repeatedly. Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping, January 6th with Ray Epps and the false flag that happened there, the incitement to go into the Capitol that they appear to be engaged in there. And we see with the January 6th example there was a vote in our own parliament that followed that immediately, and it was a unanimous vote during the pandemic to declare the Proud Boys to be a terrorist organization. And then they got Bill Blair, the safety minister, to come out and say, oh yeah, we had a bunch of stuff we were sitting on and just didn't announce it. We were going to do this anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And we still don't really know what the terroristic activity that fraternity, as far as I'm able to ascertain, was up to. They commonly get the white supremacist label, like a lot of people on the other side of the aisle do. But their president, their international leader, is a black Cuban guy. So I find that to be a bit specious. And I see people asking, the reason why I bring this up is because I see some comments coming in that are kind of saying things to the effect of like, why are we talking about Donald Trump right now? We should stick to Canadian topics. Here, I'm just going to throw one up here so we get an idea. It says, can we stick to Canadian topics when we're already with the corrupt government in the UN, the Great Reset, the New World Order, the WHO, the WEF, and they're all in this together, Schwab, Bill Gates, Trudeau. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid concern.
No, it's a great question, actually, and something we should have. We should have put up front. Why are we watching this? Why is this important? Well, it's important to us because young Mr. Trudeau up here, our beloved Prime Minister, seems to have a pattern of slavishly following whatever happens in America. So there's a shooting down there, we get gun control up here. Something happens down there, Trudeau immediately has to jump on it. The Roe v. Wade thing, and all of a sudden abortion is a crisis in Canada, when in fact it's not. So unfortunately, whether we like it or not, what happens in America matters to us. And it particularly matters at a time when we have a prime minister who seems to be almost in lockstep with the Democrats. So, yeah, so why are we talking about this? Yeah, good question, Tracy, fair question. We should follow this kind of stuff and then sort of look over to our prime minister and say, where's this guy going? So we just saw the gun grab yesterday or the day before, where they've essentially banned the import of handguns into Canada. This prompted by the shooting in Texas, and the regulation they use to ban handguns coming into Canada is the same regulation that stops American eggs, chicken, and milk coming into Canada. So this is another example of the administrative state. And guess who else is doing the same thing? Mr. Biden's White House is using executive orders and administrative regulations to govern the country, not the Congress. Now, same thing here. We're seeing this increasingly in Canada, that our prime minister and cabinet are increasingly using regulations and applying, like regulations that were intended to regulate milk are now being used to regulate guns. And it's kind of hard to draw a line there. But nonetheless, that's what's happening. So unfortunately, what happens there happens here. We're kind of behind them typically in this sort of stuff, but that's the kind of thing we have to watch. So I would say, I don't think we're going to see anything quite as radical as that happen in Canada, but nonetheless, the pattern is there. The other thing is, like it or not, America is our neighbor. It's our primary trading partner. It's our largest border. It's our only land border. And if America goes, shall we say, sideways, if there is an increase in social unrest, if there's an increase in violence there, you just know that those trends and things will spill over to our own side. So unfortunately, we watch America. Why? Because it's a bellwether for us. So good question. The other thing, I saw a couple of things in the comments there about the IRS, and unfortunately, and whether it was planned that way or not, I have no idea, and maybe it doesn't even matter, but it's just been announced that the Internal Revenue Service in America is going to get 87,000 new employees. That's more people than we have in the Canadian Forces. That's more people than work for the Pentagon. That's more people than work for the US State Department. And that's just new employees. That's not a total of 87,000. That's 87,000 new people. Most of them will be tax auditors. In other words, the people that phone you up at home and say, hey, we're going to audit you because X, Y, and Z. Right. So the sort of thinking is, okay, there's more people in America. Maybe you need more tax collectors. Fair enough. But you need to double the size of the force right now. And a lot of people are raising the question and saying, who are they going to target? And unfortunately, the American political system has become so politicized that the sense very much is the folks who are going to get targeted first will be the folks who speak out against the existing administration. And before anybody says, well, that would never happen, let's go back and remember that the IRS deliberately targeted anybody who worked with the American Tea Party, it was called a few years ago. And the head of the IRS eventually came out and admitted that, yeah, anybody who said something about the Tea Party on social media or in the mainstream news were put on the list to be amongst the first people audited. So that's another thing we can sort of start watching here. Given that the Americans have chosen to weaponize some of their departments, I think we see the same thing happening up here. So yeah, that's just a couple of quick comments on that before we move on to the next story, Jeff.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that what you were just talking about there with the IRS and the history of them going after folks on the right side of the aisle, that was something that was initiated under the first Obama administration, and I think what we're living with now is definitely to a large degree the second Obama administration. Yeah, this seems to be a continuation of where they left off with the first administration in many ways. So yeah, they, like you said, the IRS is already on the record as confirming the abuses, and now they've doubled in size. So if we're playing monkey see, monkey do with the Democrats here in Canada, then those are the kind of tactics that I think that we can expect to see the CRA engaged in as well. Only time will tell, I guess, but I think it's important to raise awareness about these kinds of concerns and help people to be vigilant when they're watching out for it. So here I'm going to go to something that's kind of from the other side of the aisle here. We saw the CBC one already. Here's Sky News Australia. They tend to be a little bit more, I don't know if I'd even say right-leaning, but they're kind of oppositional to the mainstream forces. So here we go. It's a quick one.
No volume.
Did I do that again? Fire me. I am fired. I did submit that feedback to these guys too, that they should just have it the box checked by default. Okay, here we go.
We have some breaking news, and the former US President Donald Trump is claiming his home has been raided by the FBI. According to Mr. Trump, FBI agents searched his Mar-a-Lago residence in Palm Beach, Florida. The former president has expressed his anger at the raid, and in a statement, he said it is prosecutorial misconduct, the weaponization of the justice system, and an attack by the radical left Democrats who desperately don't want me to run for president in 2024. He goes on to say such an assault could only take place in broken third world countries. Sadly, America has now become one of those countries, corrupt at a level not seen before. So that just in from the former President Donald Trump.
Okay, and here's another good one kind of from that side of the aisle that I think
well, speaking of people to help us out, standing back and standing by is former FBI official Frank Figliuzzi. Frank, thank you.
Go on, YouTube, autoplay, turn that off. Okay.
Immediate reaction.
Well,
Steve Bannon.
I gave this speech, a keynote address at the Cattlemen's Ball CPAC on Friday night. I said, we're at war. We're at a political and ideological war. And they've obviously weaponized the Justice Department. And this had to be approved by Ron Klain. This had to go up to the White House to be approved. Absolutely. Anybody saying it didn't is a liar. This had to go up the chain of command through Merrick Garland to Ron Klain at least, and Ray and these guys. But look, here's the thing. This is about pure power politics. They're absolutely scared to death about Trump. It can't be Mark Elias, the guy who laid out the entire effort to steal the 2020 election, remember the Transition Integrity Project. He's tweeting right now all the U.S. code about documents and how make sure you can't run for federal office again. They're absolutely petrified. Trump's going to announce in the next couple of weeks, win the Republican nomination, win the White House. Now, here's what's incumbent upon everybody. The House leaders right now need to step up and recommit Jim Jordan. Full investigation. I think cutting off appropriations to the FBI to get to the bottom of this. Okay, this is going to continue on. The FBI right now is the Gestapo. The FBI is the Gestapo, whether it's out in Colorado, putting a Gold Star mother like Tina Peters in chains, Peter Navarro in chains. It's absolutely obscene. This is an obscenity. And we're going to have to fight fire with fire. The way to do it is win elections, win them overwhelmingly, and then use the appropriations process to choke down the FBI and choke down the Justice Department and get to the bottom of who approved this. This is so outrageous. It needs
Steve,
to be investigated.
I want to ask you
Yes,
this
sir.
question, Steve.
Okay, so there's basically the two sides of it, and as you can see, like a lot of the folks on the Trump side of the aisle, they're saying the same things I think we are here. The thing is that if he's actually been convicted of a felony, then he can't run for president. That makes him ineligible. And what do we have coming up in the fall? But it's the midterms, and all of the pollsters are basically forecasting that it's going to be an overwhelming red wave, as in the Republicans are going to take the House. So that's bad for the Democrats, and they're basically doing everything they can to stifle that right now. And if Trump were to come out and announce that he was going to run for president in 2024, right about now, that would probably put a lot of momentum on their side. And so I think what they're doing here is they're trying to stifle that momentum before it even gets started going into the fall. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, a couple of things jump out from those discussions that we just looked at in the news there. One is the sort of overwhelming use of force. They referred to a couple of people being chained and arrested and perp walked and all this sort of stuff. Same thing with the raid on Donald Trump's house. If you have a search warrant and if it's legal, and Donald Trump's not actually there, they knew he was physically in New York at the time, so his Secret Service guys weren't there, his bodyguards probably weren't there. All they need to do is walk up, knock on the door, say, search warrant, we're coming in, and do their thing. You don't need like 30 some odd agents and all these vehicles, whatever. In other words, that was theater. It's political theater. And we're seeing this increasingly, that they send 5 or 6 people out to arrest one person. Here in Canada, Pastor Pawlowski, whatever his name is, they wanted to arrest him for the horrible crime of running a church during a pandemic. And they had a tactical team do a hard takedown on him on the side of the highway. So the guy isn't known to be armed. He's not known to be violent. He's a pastor. He's committed, this horrible crime of, running a church. It's not like he's, a serial killer or something. But they choose to use overwhelming force. And it's part of an intimidation message. In my point of view, this is theater. It's designed to intimidate. It is designed to impress people. Much like the January 6 hearings, they actually hired a TV producer to manage the hearings for them so they could make it look better. And of course, it would end with, on tomorrow's episode, we'll have a secret witness that no one's ever heard of, and it's going to be unheard of evidence, and it's going to be devastating. And then, of course, the next day, it turns out to be somebody that said they saw something that they weren't actually there for. But it's production, it's image, it's got everything to do with the narrative and very little to do with the actual truth. The other thing is they brought up, the White House said, well, we didn't know that was going to happen, and, complete surprise to us. And it's like, well, 2 things there. One, possibly you're lying through your teeth. Nobody in their right mind in the FBI would dare raid the premises of a former U.S. president without at least letting the White House chief of staff know, because the political implications of this are massive. You don't pull a stunt like that without telling the boss, no matter what organization you're in. The other possibility is that the U.S. government's just out of control. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. It's all over the place. So we're sort of faced with the choice between malice and stupidity. In other words, the White House is lying to us, which is my personal belief, or the organization is actually that poorly run, it's that stupid that they don't know what's going on. And
I think it's probably a little from column A and a little from column B there.
Yeah, one hopes that the American political system behind the scenes is working better than that the FBI wouldn't go off on a rogue operation like that without telling somebody in the White House first. I just don't believe it. I don't believe the White House on that one. So yeah, there you go. I think they're lying through their teeth. And like I said, the only other possibility is they're just fundamentally stupid at a grade 6 kind of level. And if that's true, then God help us all for the future. So anyway, yeah, I think that's kind of that story, Jeff. I don't know if we want to look at this other story in the Ottawa Police Service now.
Yeah, we'll get to that there in a second. I just got one more thing here, but Yeah, I wanted to kind of go back to just a couple of details I wanted to fill out. Like the last time we went through this with the Spygate issue, that all came back to a couple of FBI agents, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. They were having an affair. Not that that's necessarily relevant, but there were a lot of FBI text messages back and forth between those two and others, talking about an insurance policy that they were taking out now that Trump had won the election back in 2016. And Peter Strzok was the one whose FBI notebook had the note in it from a meeting with Obama in the Oval Office, where the other guy there, FBI, the chief of the FBI, was in there. I mentioned it before, but anyway, he was the one who had the note that said VP, and then an arrow saying going after General Flynn, and the question was to arrest him or get him fired, or to something like that. It was either to prosecute or to get him fired. So it looks like they were just kind of looking for dirt on behalf of the Obama administration on their political opponents, and that's what that FISA court statement was all about. They said, like, you know, they absconded and lied to the FISA court. It was a very rare statement, very rare move on the part of the FISA court there. So this is a continuation, I think, of some corruption that we've seen build since about 2008 in particular. And you mentioned this already, Tom, but I just thought I'd show a little bit of reporting on it. The judge who approved the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago once linked to Jeffrey Epstein. So here's Fox News on that.
Yeah, that one I just look at, and two things come to mind. One, the FBI was absolutely desperate to find a judge that would actually sign this thing. Because any judge that signed this thing, regardless of what happens, regardless of the truth, when you sign a search warrant to raid the house of a former U.S. president, this is going to get a lot of scrutiny, and you want to have everything lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
The fact that they chose to go to a judge who's formally tied to Jeffrey Epstein, et cetera, you just go, in a situation where you know you are going to get global attention for every period, every comma, every quotation mark, every letter, every misspelled word, you chose a guy who is so non-credible that goes to work with America's most famous pedophile, who, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein, is tied back into a whole list of who is who in the American Democratic Party elite, including dear old Bill Clinton and a bunch of other leading people. And all of this occurring while Maxwell is sitting in jail for having been a pimp for Jeffrey Epstein, and nobody's releasing the list of people for whom she was pimping. And guess who she was pimping for? And of course, it's Jeffrey Epstein. And oh my God. So they managed to somehow, out of, I don't know how many judges are in Florida that can sign search warrants, but they managed to find the one judge who is like just completely non-credible on any issue to do with the Democratic Party. And to me, it just reeks of desperation. If you had to go that far through your Rolodex to come up with that guy for a judge, and he's the only guy that would sign it, wow. Or alternatively, if you were that stupid, you didn't know this judge used to work for Epstein, then you shouldn't be running this case anyway. So again, we're kind of left with the malice of the stupidity thing. And at the end of the day, I'm going to go with malice and say they needed a judge to sign this. And they had to get somebody who was flexible enough, shall we say, to sign something, even though it's not quite legal. So they went to a guy who has, shall we say, a very weak background to start with. Now, just for viewers to know, I was involved in a case where we were investigating a judge in the RCMP. So imagine going to a judge and saying, you know, hi, Your Honor, we'd like a search warrant to put a phone tap on this guy. Oh, who's this guy? Well, Your Honor, he's a judge. And you can imagine that didn't go too well. The two guys we sent in with the search warrant came back a few hours later, pretty much, you know, beaten and bleeding. And we wound up putting in this like 600-page permission to get a search warrant, in this case, a wiretap more correctly, against a judge. And we eventually got it. But that, I mean, it was a 600-page document. There was much yelling and screaming. Senior officers were involved. And all we were investigating was a lower court judge. So I can't begin to imagine what we would have had to gone through if we were going to investigate a former prime minister. It just would have been a massive uphill battle. So the fact that they got a, shall we politely say, somewhat less than stellar judge to sign off on this thing, to me is an indication of the weakness of the case to start with.
It seems to be from our perspective, but I think what they're doing with that judge is they're saying he's a Trump appointee, like that's how they're spinning it, you know. It seems to be the case that they're using that to say that this carries more weight because he's one of Trump's friends.
Yeah, he was a judge who was appointed while Trump was president. Is
right.
It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, but I think the difference there, that's a little bit of projection really on the part of the Democrats, because they are the ones, as we've seen from their Supreme Court picks recently, who can't define the word woman and whatnot, that they select for partisan purposes, whereas when Trump was in, like, they were just filling spots with qualified people.
Yeah, so I just saw one other quick comment from somebody here about, top brass in Canada being investigated. So we're not going to go into it right now, but the whole Admiral Norman case, this was a case of the deliberate misuse of prosecutorial power in order to silence a very senior official, in this case, a vice admiral, who was saying stuff they just didn't want to hear. And eventually, the whole case blew up in the face of the Liberal Party here in Canada. Admiral Norman was vindicated. He got a absolutely massive payout. No one's actually saying how much it is, because we're not supposed to say, but it was something well north of what the Cotter family got. We'll put it that way. So the idea that you would use political power, in particular the Department of Justice and prosecutorial power, to silence or disqualify somebody you didn't like, well, it's happened here in Canada. The records are all there. Norman was completely vindicated, and it's perfectly clear that General Vance, that so-called leader of the Canadian forces, and Trudeau got together and used the system to deliberately thump that guy as badly as they could. So again, you almost hate to think about it, but this kind of junk is becoming increasingly common in our system. And this is the kind of crap we used to make fun of third world banana republics for doing, and now we're doing it. So, hard to be critical of third world banana republics anymore when we live in one. Yeah, and I don't think that, I understand what you're saying, that effectively the outcome there was Trudeau and Vance thumped Admiral Norman, but I don't believe in conspiracies. Like, I really don't think that people are sufficiently competent to pull off conspiracies. And, the fact that we all know what the WF is saying is probably evidence of that. They're not very good at keeping their secrets. But I think that really all you need is this kind of ideological alignment where people, they have a certain narrative that's been installed in their brains, and it's not conformant with reality. So they're operating in a completely different reality than the rest of us are. And what we see, I think, is a lot of this kind of throne sniffing and getting in good with the big guy and stuff like that. So when Trudeau gets out there and says that, this investigation will inevitably lead to charges, then that's a signal to people who align with him ideologically, that what he wants to see here is a conviction. And then the next thing you know is, they're raiding Admiral Norman's home in the middle of the night, and coming after his computers, which are not classified, and there wasn't anything classified involved in the purchase of the Asterix, which was what that was all about. But like you said, Tom, like in the end, Admiral Norman said that he had a story to tell Canadians, and we haven't heard that story because he took a settlement instead. So we still don't really know the extent of the kind of corruption that led to that here in Canada. But it's one of those clear indications that where the U.S. goes, so goes Canada, because we have a lot of this kind of monkey see, monkey do between the Liberals and the Democrats, Canadian and U.S. And and Trudeau's right in there with them, giving our tax dollars to the Clinton Foundation. So we can expect to see a lot more of this, I think, north of the 49. But on that one, I think now would be a good time to jump into some of what we're seeing here north of the 49. So this is something that we're tracking currently. There is another issue, for example, with the RCMP out in BC that are apparently not investigating certain complaints of
harm being done to children, by the vaccine and whatnot. That investigation is being suppressed. But, we're not going to go into a deep dive on that yet. It's just kind of something we're tracking. But this is something that's a little bit more verifiable and tangible at the moment. It says Ottawa police detectives face misconduct charges for allegedly seeking links between COVID vaccine and child deaths. So between June of 2020 and January 2022, Gruss allegedly accessed 9 child or infant death cases in which she had no investigative role. This, I think what we're talking about here in terms of the police actions and state actions and what the results are. It's basically a chilling effect. So we're talking about people who are speaking out against the wrongdoings of the current regime, or a lot of the adverse effects that we're seeing with the therapeutic that's out there, and anybody who speaks out against that or tries to do something about it, it's sort of like all of these legal and administrative processes around them light up in a way that makes their lives harder. So I think that's kind of what we're watching out for here, and we're trying to raise awareness about. Tom, do you have anything anything else to add about that? What's going on there in Ottawa? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting case in that you have a detective constable working for the Ottawa police. They work in a unit that has responsibility for child abuse. So this detective constable starts noticing there seems to be an unusual number of infant and child death cases with unexplained circumstances, i.e. the kid just died. It's not like there was a car accident or, the kid fell down the stairs or something like that. The kid just up and dies. So this constable raised the question of saying, is this a problem with mothers being vaccinated, which then passes on to the child and winds up killing the infant? And anyway, I guess this constable was told to back off. It's not your job. You're not supposed to be doing it. Someone else will do that. She apparently on her own time kept pushing ahead with the thing, and now they've suspended her. They're trying to charge her with discreditable conduct, et cetera, and trying to just basically silence her. And of course, sending a message to everybody else that if you challenge the government's narrative that the vaccine is 100% safe and effective, we will come after you and thump you as hard as we possibly can. So here's the kind of issue. The Ottawa police statement is, well, she's supposed to be in this unit where she investigates A, B, and C, but that kind of investigation really should have been done over that unit where they do D, E, and F. Mm-hmm. So she's coloring outside the lines, if you will. Therefore, we're going to thump her. Well, the other side of that story is any badge-carrying, gun-carrying officer of the peace, in other words, a police officer in Canada, can investigate any crime if they see something going on. So if a police officer makes an observation and says, hey, that looks like a murder being carried out, or that to me is evidence that a murder occurred, then they have the right to sort of push into that. Now, eventually, maybe they're supposed to turn it over to homicide or something, but any police officer in Canada can raise any observation about a potential crime. It's their job, by the way. That's what they're supposed to do. Yeah. So here is the issue. Now, you mentioned we here at V4F are looking at a case in British Columbia. We got a ton of evidence. We got emails. We've got all kinds of stuff. And as you mentioned, just so the viewers will know, we're going to put this out in a couple of weeks. It's going to be part of our expose series. I think we're going to call it Harsh Truth, something like that. And we're going to show what's going on in British Columbia, where the RCMP there at very senior levels have physical evidence that children are being injured by the vaccine, and that physical evidence is coming from doctors. It's not coming from some guy down at the end of the street who doesn't like Trudeau. And we're going to raise the question and say, look, is this political interference? Is the reason they're not investigating dead children and injured children? Does this have more to do with politics and a lack of evidence? So while we're working on that story, of course, this one pops up and it's like, oh my God, it's almost the same thing. There is a ton of information coming out there saying children are not at risk from COVID unless they are immunocompromised to start with. There is also a bunch of information coming out that women who've been vaccinated have neonatal problems, they have natal problems, they have children die in the womb and all this kind of stuff. There is a bunch of information out there and the scientific evidence continues to pile up. So I look at this thing with the Ottawa Police, and if I was talking to old Tinkerbell today, interim Chief Police Bell of the Ottawa Police Service, my advice would be, dude, bury this case, make it go away, bury the evidence, do whatever you need to do, just make it go away. Because if you don't, and if this case drags on, which it will, you're going to get a bunch of doctors and a ton of evidence and guys like us saying the evidence is clear that there is a link between the vaccine, women, and problems with children. So if you persecute her, which to me appears to be what's happening as opposed to prosecuting her, and you're successful in this case, and she decides to appeal it to an actual court outside the Ottawa Police, there's a pretty good chance that by the time it works its way through the court system, there's going to be a ton more evidence to show that any police officer in Canada would be justified, not necessarily in prosecuting somebody, but they are completely justified to raise the question, is there a link between the death of this baby, this 6-week-old infant or whatever, and the vaccine? It's a totally fair question. The science is there. It needs to be investigated. And by shutting down these kinds of investigations, you kind of look like you're a part of the cover-up rather than a part of the solution. So I think senior police officials right across the country are going to be looking at this, and they need to start asking a question. Whose side are they on here? Are they on the side of injured and dead children, or are they on the side of the politicians who want to push a certain narrative? So as we started this thing, we'll say, interesting times are coming, Jeff. This one's going to get really interesting. And we're going to add a big part to this conversation in a few weeks when we do the thing on the RCMP in British Columbia.
And I have some great ideas too for our Harsh Truth series too. I have a bunch that I need to do for that. Some very complex topics, it's like you say, it's very interesting times. I have so much that I want to say about this that I can't even really get my thoughts straight. But I want to throw another comment up here. It says, Jeff Tom, what do you think about the Canadian top brass being investigated and relieved of duty? Does it sound like a cleansing of anyone not supporting the left? I think it was 5 in a row. I think it was more than that now. But I'll say that, I do think that this is essentially tantamount to Stalin's purge of the Red Army. I was there when they brought in the critical race theory for the new anti-racism training. I saw how polarizing the training was, even in the first training session with just the top brass at the unit involved. And of course, I was dead set against it and flat out called it communism in an email to all the senior staff. That was pretty near the end for me. I guess what I would say, how I would kind of tie all this together is we have kind of a return to theocracy is what I see here. And that is the default state for human mammals. We live under theocracies and we tend to deify our elders and our leaders and things like that. We have basically this dogma, the wokeness dogma that's being injected into all of our institutions via anti-racism training and a lot of gender-based analysis plus type stuff. They're all culturally Marxist ideas, postmodernist ideas that are terribly polarizing for any group of people, any multi-ethnic, multicultural kind of multi-gender, bi-gender, I guess, the organization, like it's just pushes at all the seams of the cultural mosaic that we have. I think that what you're seeing is anybody who stands up to it is getting purged. They're facing a lot of backlash, and a lot of people have finally said, we've had enough of this. A lot of the senior folks that are just kind of coming up into the higher levels in the last few years, in the late 2010s and stuff like that, they're coming up on the end of their contracts. We have a wave of people who got in before 2007 who are on the old terms of service, the IE20, so they only need to do 20 years, whereas people who got in after that have to do 25 years. So that last wave of guys on the 20-year contracts, like they're all, from what I'm hearing from my NCO crew and stuff, it seems like they're all jumping ship. And basically all that we're going to have left are the people who will just do and think whatever they are told. And I would be shocked to find out that that's not going on elsewhere, particularly in our federal institutions. So what are your thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, without doubt, Jeff. I mean, some folks call this the Long March through the institutions, a sort of reference to the Chinese Communist Long March before they took over the government there. Just by way of background, I'm so old, I did my master's degree at York University in 1989 and 1990. And I was kind of startled at the time, although I didn't really understand the context, to be introduced to this whole idea of critical theory. And basically, critical theory just says everything is wrong. You can't trust everything. We're going to take everything apart. We're going to destroy everything. And I kind of thought, this is not so much critical theory, it is nihilism, but whatever. At the time, I didn't really get the context of it. But as a master's student, I had to take a couple of generic political science courses, the one that, everybody has to take while you're there kind of thing. And this is where I first got introduced to this idea of the difference between sex and gender, that sex doesn't necessarily identify you as gender. Just because you're born male doesn't mean you're a male or whatever. Then you separate the two. And I kind of thought, yeah, I kind of get the idea there's gendered things people do, i.e. people have a baby. If it's a boy, they get a blue jumpsuit, and if it's a girl, they get a pink one. And they were sort of saying, see, that's how people try to impress gender upon the fact that you're born male or born female. And at the time, I kind of thought, yeah, I mean, I kind of get what you're talking about, but the whole thing to me just kind of sounded silly. And what I didn't realize at the time, and now that I look back at it, that was the long march through the institutions was already going in the late 80s and early 90s. Yep. And it's really only sort of like post-2000, 2005, 2010 kind of stuff that the long march is pretty much complete. So here in Canada, I think it's fair to say the RCMP has been politicized right down to the desk officer level. The military is in a state of managed decline, and it's being politicized and gutted by politically correct forces. And one of the things, I mean, if you see, we've got a humanist padre, a padre who willfully doesn't believe in God, but is a padre anyway. We've got Elections Canada, which has been politicized. And I mean, Elections Canada went after Ezra Levant for a book he published. I think it was called The Libranos, which was taking a shot at sort of, the connections between organized crime and the Liberal Party. And what really stunned me about it was they said, well, you publishing this book, could have affected the election, and therefore you're not allowed to publish it. So they spent a huge amount of time and money prosecuting that case, which they eventually lost. But the stunning part was they didn't say the book was wrong. I mean, if it was full of false information and he was making stuff up, I still don't think Elections Canada should have been allowed to go after him, but at least you could kind of say, well, okay, whatever. But I mean, they couldn't show anything that the book was wrong, but they just said, well, it could affect the outcome of the election. So therefore Elections Canada can step in and prosecute you using, of course, government money, for which then Ezra Levant then has to spend money defending himself. So, there's the military's gone, RCMP's gone, Elections Canada is clearly flipped. The Department of Justice, the last justice minister we had, who was of any credibility whatsoever, got fired. Why? Because she was trying to follow the law. And the fact that she was Indigenous and female was kind of even funnier, that Trudeau just ran right over her, punted her out of there. And the message to the Justice Department is, you will do my will or we will get you fired. So the Department of Justice, there you go, Public Safety Ministry under Ralph Goodale and under the current guy, Marco Mendocino, just a continuing series of lies. They've been politicized. And then, of course, the biggest institution of all, the one that's most important, is the media. No media equals no democracy. No democracy equals no accountability, et cetera, et cetera. And Justin Trudeau, I mean, give the guy credit. He spent $600 million of your and my and everybody else's money to buy these folks off. And by and large, he's been effective. And it's been so effective, he's extending the program. He's going to buy them off even more. So, yeah, it's reasonable to say at this point that what you see going on in the military from your own personal upfront kind of observation can be paralleled through a series of other departments, that the entire government structure, if you will, the institutions of our civil society have been corrupted against us. They're working against us rather than for us. And of course, this is coming to a head now. We see it coming to a head in America. I think this raid on Donald Trump is going to have implications that go far beyond Trump himself. We're seeing it here in Canada with the attack on Admiral Norman, with the firing of the Justice Minister, with this recent gun grab law, et cetera, et cetera. So this is our path for the moment. we are on a path where the administrative state, if you will, is ruling through regulations and bureaucratic decisions rather than ruling through the law. And it's going to be a conflict. It's going to be with us for a while. And as our economy slowly goes down the tubes, or rapidly goes down the tubes, it's going to get very, very difficult for a lot of folks. So I'm going to use that expression one more time, and then I promise not to use it again. Interesting times, Jeff.
Yeah, no kidding, Tom. Yeah, I think we're in for a lot more of this stuff. It really does seem like the independence is gone between the different institutions, and I like that you mentioned the long march through the institutions. I think that sort of that expression made its way into mainstream academia sometime in the 70s. And around that time, that would have been when third wave feminism and Black Panthers movement were, at their most radical, and we had terrorism and things like that, like left-wing terrorism and the riots at Berkeley, and Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, got Michel Foucault fired from Berkeley. He was the author of Critical Theory, as you mentioned. That's not the title, I'm sorry, but Critical Theory is kind of his brainchild. Yeah, I mean, I look at that stuff, and I think that it's a counter-enlightenment movement is essentially what it is. They can it's sophistry. They use a lot of fancy language basically to dress it up, and there's a lot of attack at basically just attacking the idea of truth itself. That it's all really perceptions, and if you change the perceptions, then you're changing the reality, because that's all it really is. Some other radical professors might have included Jacques Derrida and Herbert Marcuse, guys like that. But yeah, so when that stuff was going on back in the 70s, and I would say it pretty much came to a head around 78, when the third wave feminists, the sort of seminal authors of the third wave feminism movement, were pushing the Equal Rights Amendment forward in the United States, that would have eliminated any distinctions on gender in American law. And there was a PhD lady by the name of Phyllis Schlafly who came forward. She was a mother of 6, and I think a housewife and author. And anyway, she was a pretty strong, bold woman who came forward to speak up against the Equal Rights Amendment, because as she recognized, it would have made women subject to the draft in America. And so when they were on the debate stage, and the moderator flat out asked Catherine McKinnon, I believe it was, she's a seminal third wave feminist, whether that was true, whether they really expected women to be subject to the draft. And she said, yes, we do. We expect that women should be drafted as well. And that was where everybody kind of got off that crazy train. And the 20 states that had already ratified the Equal Rights Amendment actually pulled back their ratification. And it never did go through. But the thing is that people like Catherine McKinnon and Mary Daly and Valerie Solanas and Andrew Dworkin, they didn't just go away. Like they didn't just disappear and give up from there. They went back into the institutions, and they became professors, and they became authors of these books that are now distributed in the different curricula. And they're the authors of the curricula that include these kinds of books for students to study, and put the counter-Enlightenment writings sort of on the same level as the Enlightenment writings, when really the institution of the university was created essentially as a conservatory of Enlightenment rationalism, and it has since lost its way. So like you said, those people who went on the long march through the institutions, like say around the late 70s, like the Catherine McKinnons and the Andrea Dworkins, they went in there, they got their professorships, and they've been moving up ever since. And so it's that generation, it's the boomer generation, as I'm always saying, not you, Tom, but the boomer generation was a very radical generation back in the day. They had terrorist attacks on campus and the whole shebang. And they're the ones that went into the institutions at that time, and they've continued to ascend in their roles. And that's kind of what we see happening right now, is at the very tops of the institution, there doesn't really appear to be any delineating markers as to where one ends and the other one begins. And we're fraught with these kinds of conflicts of interests and radical agendas being pushed down in the form of critical theory and anti-racism training in the CAF and so on and so forth. So as usual, I'm going to plug for my usual line and trash the boomers because I think that Neil Howe was right in Strauss-Howe generational theory when he predicted this crisis in 1990. So look that up. But yeah, that is kind of what we see happening right now. As we have the sort of the initial radicals of the 60s and 70s. They've aged into peak institutional power through natural attrition, which is something every generation does. And that's kind of why we see this, why we're in this crisis era right now, is because we have this counter-Enlightenment dogma that's kind of being relied upon, where our systems are set up, obviously, using Enlightenment rationalism. But I digress on that, Tom. I think that'll be my rant for the day. And as always, I'll point out that there are good ones in a fourth turning. The prophet generation, which is the boomer generation of peak institutional power. Good examples would include Abraham Lincoln, or in the realm of fiction, there's also the examples of the Wizard of Oz being a good guy, where all the other elders are kind of like the child-eating witches, and so on and so forth. So anyway, it's just a matter of kind of figuring out which ones are the evil witches and which ones are the Wizard of Oz. And Tom is my Wizard of Oz in my little fourth turning story here. So anyway, that's another one of those harsh truth episodes that I got to get out there and talk about the fourth turning and how it applies to Canadian politics. It's definitely been on my list for a while, so more to come on that one. And since I did the long rant, Tom, I'll throw it over to you for the last word for the day.
Okay, just reading the comments. Derek asking a question: why aren't our laws being enforced? And I'd say, watch this space. Once we get our daily show going, when Freedom Front North is running on a regular basis, we are going to do a thing on the RCMP in British Columbia and their failure to act on child death and child injury cases. And that will sort of answer a lot of your questions. At least we're hoping that's the intent of it. Also, a thing from Tracy. She just raising the question about having an effect in your community involvement. Here's the thing. I mean, a lot of people feel frustrated. I hate what's going on, but I just can't do anything. And the answer is, yeah, you can. Attend your local city council meeting. Get involved with your local school board. Start going to protests in your area. Join community associations to find out what's going on, and you can have an effect. So a lot of people tend to focus on like the prime minister, the cabinet, and parliament, and it's also sort of esoteric and up in the cloud, and how do you deal with it? But the reality is, the influence the people have is at the lowest end of the spectrum, and if you start there and start pushing up, you'll have an effect. So one last thought for the day: all this pessimism, all this knowledge about the long march to the institutions, I hope we've reached peak stupidity. And from here on in, we're going to get peak less stupidity. At least I'm hoping. And my theory on that is, we now have a Supreme Court judge sitting in the United States who openly states she can't define the difference between a man and a woman because she's not a biologist. And if that's not the stupidest statement I've ever heard come out of an educated person, I'm not sure what it is. But it's a very 1984 thing. What she is saying is, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe, what you know. Believe what we tell you. There is no difference between a boy and a girl, and men can have babies. And if you can convince people that men can have babies and they openly accept that, you can get people to believe anything. So hopefully, I think we've reached peak stupidity. We're kind of we're sitting at the apex, and hopefully we're going to start getting less stupid, but let's see how it goes, Jeff.
Indeed. And since I saw a couple of comments too, like, what are the action items? What can we do about this? And I know that you just mentioned this don't believe your lying eyes tactics. When people are making claims like this to you, like men can have babies and blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you, the one thing that'll stop any con man in his tracks, you just say, how do you know that? And watch him spin out. Just watch him squirm. A Socratic method. This is what Socrates did. This is what he's famous for. He's the father of the Enlightenment. And he just walked out into the market and started going around to all the purported experts and investigating their claims. And he would say, well, how do you know these things? And if they gave him some nonsense answer, then he would say, okay, well, let's do an analogy here. I mean, would the logic still apply if it were this situation? And if it doesn't, then your point isn't valid. And basically what happens when you go around applying the Socratic method is that you find out that most people are totally full of it. And so that's what I think is the TTPs on the individual level is, you know, the Socratic approach and a little radical candor. But more videos on that to come. Tom, thanks again for taking the time to provide us with all the best analysis and intelligence on the political scene out here today. So really glad to have you. And I can see in the comments that what we're doing here is very much appreciated. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Roger out.